Is your team in the process of selecting technologies and maybe architectural decisions about how the product's being built because you're going to grow, or maybe there's a new product that you're getting ready to offer? Well, stay tuned, because today we're going to talk about evolving your software architecture to meet the growth needs of your business and product. Hi, I'm Jamie Edwards, and I help leaders of software development teams and software companies to do a better job releasing their software, understanding what their customers want, and having a work environment where people can be as creative and innovative as possible. Today I'd like to talk about software architecture and how you can use it to evolve the complexity and the needs of your product as your product grows. So let's start off by just talking about what is software architecture. Well, it's usually making some decisions about some patterns and technologies that will be used to develop a software product prior to actually getting started building it. You know, you might disagree a little bit with that definition in that there's many teams that as they're building the product will make those architectural decisions along the way, and I'm certainly an advocate for that much more agile approach. But there does tend to be some decision making that somebody, perhaps someone more senior on the team, makes before actually moving forward with the larger team to actually develop the product. So what I want to talk about today is some considerations you might have when you're actually making decisions about what those technologies and patterns are. How can you match them to the true scale of your product and the skills and needs of your team? So the first step in this process is to really figure out what the scale of your product actually is today. You know, Geoffrey Moore wrote a very famous book called Crossing the Chasm, where he describes how, as a product's moving through its life cycle in the marketplace, it goes through different segments of customers, and depending on where along that phase of being exposed to segments of customers you are, you may need to actually change the way you sell the product, you actually advertise for it. And in this video, I'm going to talk specifically about changing the software architecture depending on where you are along that timeline. So if you look at Geoffrey's famous diagram he uses to show that process of a product coming to market, it looks like a wave or a bell curve. And the beginning of the bell curve is really people that they're willing to see some bugs in your product. They're willing to try some things that haven't been proven by the larger customer base yet. And also, it tends to be that the group of people that are using your product at that point is much smaller. You haven't really reached critical mass yet. You haven't hit the mainstream market. As you progress towards more maturity in the product and it gets adopted by more people, the opposite is true. A much larger group of people are going to be hopefully using the product, and they're going to have much less ability to deal with defects and issues, and it really needs to be much more polished and much higher quality, and it really needs to meet all the needs of people that are going to be a little bit more skeptical, and in some cases a lot more skeptical of whether the product really meets their needs. So the first thing to consider with respect to this is, are you selecting technologies that are appropriate for how mature the product is in the marketplace? You know, I see a lot of teams where there may be a team member that's new to the team that came from another company, and they may have worked at a large company like Dell or Sigmatel or something like this, and worked on a product that was much more mature in its life cycle. And so because that was their experience, that product had all the fixings in the architecture, all the cross-cutting concerns, all the special patterns and documentation and flexibility and everything that was necessary for a product of that maturity level in the market. However, that person may come onto a team that's exploring a new opportunity, a new business benefit or capability that a company wants to offer with software. And at that time, really the goal of the product and how it's developed is really to get feedback from the market and find out, is this the right product for the customer? And oftentimes I see some issues sometimes when people, I tend to use the word over-architect or select a very comprehensive, full stack set of technologies just to build a minimum viable product. And you can go back and watch the video that I recorded a couple weeks ago on minimum viable product to kind of get my philosophy for that. But really, It's tough as a software architect or as a team to always make the perfect decision, and I wouldn't even strive for that. But I'm really just recommending, consider the maturity of your product in the market and whether there may be some simpler technologies, some things that are more off the shelf. Maybe choosing, for example, a monolith style of architecture where you really have the whole application is packaged together, and maybe there's a set of layers, but it's not fragmented into a whole bunch of things like microservices, which is really popular at this time. If you've got a brand new product and you're just trying to bring that product to market and the sales organization is just trying to get even 100 or maybe 1,000 people on that product, it may not make sense to select technologies that allow the product to handle a huge amount of users if there aren't even a huge amount of users yet. As software developers and as architects, and I certainly have fallen prey to this over my career, we tend to want to select an architecture or a set of technologies that will handle any growth needs of the product. And kind of my thought process, and I think a lot of our other software architects' thought process is, if I make the right technology and pattern decisions up front, well then as the product grows, I won't have to do anything. I won't have to refactor. I won't have to change the stack at all. And this just simply isn't true. Any software product that's successful in the market, even over a 6-month to year-long period, there's new technologies that are going to come out, and you're going to want to use them on the product. There's going to be new team members that bring new ideas, and they're going to be incredibly beneficial, and the team may want to adapt to them and use them on the product. And the only way that we can do that, I think, is if you keep the architecture simple when the product's first having its core theories of value, validated in the marketplace, well then refactoring it is easier, because the more patterns we introduce and the more aspects of the architecture that we require our team members to use just to do simple things in the product, though again those may be viable for a mature product, they make it harder to change. So that's the first thing I wanted you to just consider, is when you're selecting your software architecture and you're picking the technologies, are you picking technologies that are appropriate for the scale of your product? I personally think that the trend in the industry towards single-page applications and React.js and Knockout and Angular and all of this, I think those technologies are fun to work with. I've certainly used them on projects, but I see too many companies that select that stack simply because it's what's hot. All the recruiters, tend to be out there looking for it. And frankly, there's a lot of businesses that think, hey, we need to use React, or we need to use Angular, or we need to use Aurelia to draw talent to our company. And that's true, but they're kind of perpetuating the myth that that technology stack is appropriate for all web products. And most products, it's not. Most products, it would be better if they just stuck with maybe an MVC framework on Node.js or Java or C# or Ruby on Rails or something like that. Because really, you're just trying to get the product out there, make sure it functions and it even meets the needs of its customers. If you get to a point where you actually have to handle, making JSON requests to services because your user interface just isn't responsive enough for a huge number of users, well then at that point, the business is going to be hopefully so profitable and there will be so much revenue available that making an investment in a more complicated architecture like that will be a no-brainer. But doing it at the beginning, you're really putting your company under a lot of pressure that they're going to be essentially waiting for your team to deliver things that are somewhat trivial. And really the thing the business needs more than anything at that point is they need positive confirmation that what they're delivering is what customers want. So the simpler technology stack you can select at that point in the business, the more valuable you are as a software developer, an architect, a lead to the business. The second thing I want to talk about is when you're selecting a technology stack or a set of software architectural patterns to use on a product, you really need to consider, in my opinion, the mastery of skills on the team. So if you have a team that is extremely fluent with, let's say your stack of choice is Node.js. They're all masterful JavaScript programmers. They've used Node.js before. Maybe you're using Express.js or any one of the other hundreds of Node.js frameworks out there. Well, if your team is really good at it and really mastered it, then throwing a stack of technologies on them in the software architecture that represents all the latest and greatest NPM packages that they could go out and use, and having like a really rich full stack on your product makes sense, because you've got a set of skills on that team that they understand it and they can adapt to it. However, if you've got a team that's just starting to adopt a technology stack, or maybe they're very senior people, but they just aren't as good with using, every little thing that's out there, you may want to select a technology stack or a set of architectural patterns that's much simpler and more pared down. And related to that point, the other thing I see some teams and some software architects do, and I've certainly been guilty of this, especially in the first 10 years of my career, is, as technologists, we love to innovate. We love to come up with new things. And so it's tempting for us to roll our own framework and kind of try to take a whole bunch of off-the-shelf packages and put something on top of it that's, Jamie's dependency injection framework, or, Tom's write once, run everywhere JavaScript framework. And this becomes something that is cool to us, and we can go out on GitHub and, try to get a whole bunch of people behind it. But we really have to consider, every time we introduce a new framework or a new package or a new way of doing something, we're actually then on the hook to document it, train it, and train people on it and support it. And I think, we all, myself included, need to really ask ourselves, as we're under the pressure to deliver something for the business using software, are we willing to really spend the time that it takes to do all those things to make sure our framework is adopted? Because it's already challenging enough, I find, even on a team of, 3 to 5 people, to keep everybody to follow the appropriate patterns. And if there's already documentation out there and there's already training available for a set of technologies, and you can get those to just work out of the box with each other, well, then you already have training materials out in the community and documentation that people can go to learn that. And that doesn't place an extra, administrative and training burden on you as the innovator. So, again, I love creating new frameworks and patterns, and I've been doing it, my whole career. But as I've gotten older and as I've done this longer, and I'm in my 21st year now doing software development, I really tend to, I think, be a little bit more conservative in that. By saying that, I mean, I want software developers and people on my team to be able to use the latest technologies, but I tend to really think strongly and hesitate a little bit more before putting my stamp on it and trying to add something that's special that I bring to the table, versus really just doing a great job of picking, what's the best dependency injection framework? What's the best error handling approach? What's the best way for this set of technologies we're going to use to work with the editors that they're using? Whether you're using Vim or Emacs or Visual Studio or, Eclipse or whatever that is. Rather than me going out and trying to find some unique way to add my little stamp on it, I'm really trying to think, what are the best things that the community already loves out there, and how can I get those into the product and into the technology stack and let people just go nuts and actually add value to the product, so we can start to get that validation from the business that what we're developing is really a good idea. And if you think about it, one of the most challenging things in software development is hitting estimates. Well, you're going to do a better job of hitting your estimates if you're using a set of technologies that there's a huge community out on the internet that are all using as well. So related to that point, one thing I want you to possibly consider is, if you really are early along that, adoption cycle, going back to Geoffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, and you're really trying to validate your business ideas, I really think that every decision about the software architecture should lean a little bit more towards picking something that lets the team be productive over something that lets the team be flexible. You know, something as simple as if there's part of the software architecture that lets the team talk to a database. Well, if you're just validating your business idea and you could choose from one database access technology that, let's say, can only talk to MySQL server, and that's the database that you're using for your initial minimum viable product. But there's also a database technology that has drivers that can talk to, you know, 15 other databases out there. It's tempting to choose the one that allows you to talk to as many databases as possible. But if there's any extra complexity in implementing things that comes with that extra flexibility, I tend to find that it's better to lean towards what's most productive and allow the team to, again, refactor to something more flexible only when it's actually needed. Because otherwise the team's really investing in doing work for the possibility that they may need that in the future. And until that need actually becomes reality, it's really wasted work and wasted complexity. So the next point I'd like to talk about is being able to emotionally detach from the architecture. What do I mean by this? Well, as innovators and proud software developers and members of teams, we choose, again, a stack or a set of technologies, and I think in the back of our mind we think this isn't going to need to change, or maybe it won't need to change for 2 years. And I think that's somewhat of a dangerous mindset, and it's better to adopt the mindset of, I'm going to select the best stack of technologies that I can based on the product's needs today. And I'm actually going to prepare myself and my team and the business and everybody's expectations to know there's a high likelihood that we're going to change this architecture. We're going to introduce new patterns. We're going to do refactoring, and not have the team look at refactoring and stack selection changes as a bad thing, but just look at it as a natural way of doing software development. You know, I think refactoring sometimes gets a bad rap at companies, especially on the business side, they sometimes look at it as, well, why are you telling me I have to spend all this money to change the technologies? You didn't do your job right. You should have selected those technologies at the beginning. Well, I think one of the jobs of successful software architects or leads over software teams, or just people who are really communicating with the business about the technology, is setting the expectation with the business that, hey, as this product comes to market, we're going to need to change what technologies are used in it. And so we're going to pick the appropriate technologies today, but I want you to be prepared that at any time, any sprint, any period along the project's progression, we may need to come back to you and ask for a change. And this is simply because we've decided to err on the side of simplicity so that you can get business value out to your customers quicker. But with that comes the trade-off that you need to be prepared that we may need to change the technology stack. And if the business pushes back against that and they really want you to invest heavily in picking a super flexible, full stack, all the bells and whistles architecture from the beginning, I think it's our job to make sure that we help the business understand we're happy to do that for you, but your velocity, your ability to get things out is going to be slower because of that. And as long as they understand that and they're fine with it, I think it's fine. Again, personally, I would tend to encourage you to communicate the importance of letting the architecture evolve to the business, but that's just not always feasible. So next you might be wondering, when do I evolve the architecture? How do I know when it makes sense to actually make a change? Well, I think one of the most important things to do is to really have monitoring in place from the very beginning on your product, no matter what technology stack you use. So by monitoring, there's really two things I'm talking about. One is having the ability to look at how the architecture, and especially the infrastructure, things like cloud resources, servers, load balancers, firewalls, network throughput, everything that supports that product, there needs to be a formal monitoring process where, and I don't care if you're doing, DevOps or not, where somebody's looking at the environment, whether it's the test environment or the production environment where you're actually working on and releasing the software, and looking for trends in when the hardware or the infrastructure is being overutilized, or it's being, hitting the memory too much, or any number of indicators. It'll really depend on your product that would indicate, what, the infrastructure may need to change, or maybe something about how we're using the database needs to be optimized, or maybe the way that we're asking the code to do something could be handed off to a different layer of the architecture, and that would cause it to perform more effectively. I think the only way you're going to get ahead of that is if you have a formal process for really monitoring the product from the very beginning, and every change you introduce, sprint to sprint, or if you're doing Kanban, every time a task that you complete goes into production, having the team think about, what are we going to watch? What are we going to monitor? What's going to tell us that we need to make a change? The second thing I think we can do to help us know when is it time to change a pattern is to really look at the throughput of the team. And, if you watch any of my other videos, I'm very hesitant towards any business that tends to lean heavily towards looking at the efficiency of its people and how, close their estimates are to reality as a way to determine how successful software developers are. And you can go back and watch many of my other videos. The Scrum versus Kanban one is a good example. The software estimation one's also good. But monitoring the throughput of the team and looking at how effectively the team's able to introduce changes, I think can also be a good indicator of when it's time to change things. If the team was able to produce, let's say, 5 to 10 story points, or however you want to measure throughput, within a given period of time, and now over time it's went down to 2, or they used to deliver 50 and now they're delivering 12. Well, looking at that it's usually a lagging indicator, and there can be a variety of reasons why that's the case. That's not just the software architecture, but it is an indicator you can use to kind of give you an idea, maybe it's time now that one architectural pattern that we kind of put on the back burner for a while, we didn't really want to address, now's the time to do it. Well, I think if you're disciplined about having specific checkpoints that you're looking at, how is the team's efficiency changing over time? Because that's inevitable, that's going to happen. And at least considering, is it possible that the software architecture might need to have some revisions? That's another way you can know, maybe now's the time to move to a single page application. Maybe now's the time to start using Hadoop instead of just, a relational database. Maybe now's the time to build a data warehouse instead of using just the transactional system for reporting. I mean, there's a variety of different things that you could change, but looking at the team's throughput is a great way to find out maybe it's time to do it now. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up below, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.